The curtain rises now on a new approach to theatre in this week's Sign On.
In today's programme, we will be looking at the provision and quality of signed interpreted theatre. There has been a lot of heated debate on this subject over the past few months. We are at the Sadler's Wells Theatre for the launch of a new organisation called SPIT, Signed Performances in Theatre. There are people here who represent many of the important London theatres, drama companies and other organisations who have joined SPIT to try to encourage and develop the quality of signed interpreted performances.
Also thanks Sadler's Wells for hosting this event. I also work for English Touring Opera, and we've been doing a lot of pioneering work in developing our work for deaf people. We're delighted that we've been able to be involved in this event as well. We hope to achieve truly integrated performances and to ensure that deaf people can be part of our cultural community. And I'd like to pass you on now to John Wilson.
Today is very exciting for me, as I'm here to start the launch of SPIT. When I first started working for Shape 2 years ago, one of the first projects I wanted to develop was a way of raising the standard of theatre interpreter. At that time I had little idea how to achieve this, but in what seems such a short time I'm now standing here launching SPIT. It's great!
Arts organisations are very enthusiastic about signed performances in theatre, and we have employed an administrator to actually run the organisation on our behalf. Ian DePledge, our new administrator, is actually deaf himself and has been employed initially for 3 months. Raising funding to be able to pay our administrator and put into action all the ideas we have has been more of a problem. Obviously, we're looking for every possible source that we can find, and that's something that we will continue to do.
Well, already I have quite a lot of work to do. The aim of SPIT is to encourage liaison between the deaf community and theatres, and to develop that rapport. My priority is to set up a computer database. It will cover theatres that provide interpreters, deaf consumers, and a list of theatre interpreters. I want to look at publicity and the best way to attract deaf people. Also to find out what they want or don't want from the theatres. So this means research and to attract more deaf people to the performances.
Well, we wish SPIT the best of luck in the future. They are starting in London but do hope to expand nationwide. There are theatres and interpreters who are extending their roles in the area of providing enjoyment of theatre performances. We saw earlier Peter Llewellyn-Jones, one of the leading theatre interpreters, doing opera. We met him in Newcastle on tour with the Royal Shakespeare Company. We went along to see the various workshops and backstage tours for both deaf and hearing people at the Theatre Royal.
recipe. It's a sugar-based solution. I don't know anything more than that because he won't tell anybody. It's a sugar-based solution, which, there you go. Yeah, quite effective. And if you think about this, I mean, they do this quite often. You put it into like a freezer bag. That's any size of freezer bag, depending how much blood you want. A small freezer bag, it was just going to be a cut. Insert, let's say I was going to be cut here. Insert the freezer bag inside, and then slit it. Blood comes out. You've got a fairly realistic wound happening, I think, in front of you. And a lot of washing powder as well had to be used to clean that blood off. Let's say someone had a warty nose. What do you think we would use? Brilliant. We've done it. Rice Krispies are used. Rice Krispies stuck onto the face and then set. But very, very effective, again. And then sort of made up. Right. Caliban. Could we have a volunteer? A brave person? Yeah? You'd be brilliant. Fabulous. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, before your very eyes, we're now going to transform Caliban. Yeah. Expresses there. And then what we do is we get some red, like Sandra's applying now, on a brush, and we just sort of colour it. So it looks like kind of like a gaping wound, or a sort of an infected sore, or a very old scar. Okay, if Caliban can now stand up, yeah, and stay there. Let's see, get you underneath the light. Where's the light? Yeah, there's the light. So, open your, and just open mouth.
Peter, how did you become involved with theatre interpreting?
Well, prior to training to be a social worker for the deaf, I went to drama college. Anyway, I became a social worker and then an interpreter. Then the opportunity arose to interpret in the theatre. It appealed to me, so I accepted their invitation.
Just how important is it for deaf people to have access to theatre performances?
Just how important do I think theatre interpreting is? Well, it depends what we mean by important. Important is things like interpreters at the doctors, in the courts, work. Interviews, for example, are very important. Training and education, these are vital. So what about theatre interpreting? Where does it fit in? Well, pretty far down the list. It's not really important. But in terms of leisure, deaf people like football, others like to go to the theatre. That's fine, it's about access.
Some performances are interpreted in British Sign Language, whereas some interpreters use sign-supported English. Do you think it's right for interpreters to decide which mode of communication to use?
Right, whether an interpreter should use BSL or SSE? Well, for me, they should use British Sign Language to provide access to the profoundly deaf community in their language, BSL. It's really vital. If you wanted access in English, that's fine. There are many ways to do this. You could read a script or look at subtitles, many ways. For the deaf community, you should provide what I'm doing now. Other interpreters may disagree, fine, they do it their way. My way is BSL.
Do you feel that the theatre and the interpreter prepare well enough in advance of the performance? Is the preparation good enough, or does it need to be improved?
Preparation before you go to the theatre, well, perhaps it's important. You may go to a Shakespeare performance and have difficulty understanding. Hearing people will often sit there and lose the thread. In fact, most hearing people do not understand Shakespeare. Now, if you were wise, you would read it before you go, and you would have a better grasp for when you actually go and see it. Deaf people are the same. They go never having seen it before and are unsure of the meaning. However, some theatres now have workshops where deaf people can learn about the play and its meaning, so when they see the actual performance, they can fully appreciate the meaning.
Follow me. Yes. So if you all could just come onto the stage. And just gather around, come into the centre area here. At the beginning of the play is to create the sensation of being on a boat. So this timber-based floor is the ship's deck. And I don't know if you can see, but also there are lots of trapdoors. And at the beginning of the play, for the storm at sea, the trapdoors open up and the ship's
stewards, etc., come out from the trap doors. So it's quite effective once you put lighting on it. It also, this wooden floor here, has to be used for other environments as well. This wig is very simply made. It's made out of string and sort of wood shavings, really, with flowers just decorated on the top. Beautiful, isn't it?
As you saw, there's a lot more of interest than just the performance. In the studio today, we have invited some deaf people and Peter to discuss the future prospects of sign-interpreted theatre. Join us for that in a few minutes. Glad you could join us again. Our studio guests are Peter Llewellyn-Jones, an experienced interpreter and senior lecturer at Wolverhampton University, John Wilson, Deaf Arts Officer of SHAPE in London, Anne Goldfinch, coordinator of the British Deaf Association Interpreting Agency and a keen opera fan, Terry Ruane, a theatre critic and ex-performer, Jean Sinclair, a professional deaf actress recently back from Australia, Stuart Healy, an ex-performer and keen theatre-goer, and Ian Townsley, who has been involved both in acting and playwriting and who works at Doncaster College. Ian Townsley, you've been involved over the years both as a playwright and theatre-goer. Do you think that the majority of interpreted performances are suitable for deaf people? What about other kinds of plays, for example the classics?
In terms of classic plays, I think they're suitable for those who are interested in theatre and have an understanding of the language. But for the majority of deaf people, they're not accessible. It's not their fault, it's education. Most have been educated in partially hearing units. Deaf people flock to see pantomime because they are familiar with the story and really appreciate and enjoy it. Deaf people need an introduction to classic plays, an education, so they can understand what the play is actually about.
I agree with what's been said about access and about gleaning information from deaf audiences. We certainly need more deaf participation, because at the moment there are too many plays and dramas around that are just not suitable for deaf people. They're missing the plot completely.
The problem with what Anne said about which plays are suitable for a deaf audience and whether some are at all, I'm worried about that, really. In the past, theatres have asked me to interpret plays which I felt were not suitable for a deaf audience. But thought, well, I'll have a go anyway. Well, the deaf audiences have absolutely loved it. Other times it's been a play which I felt was suitable and deaf people didn't like it. The question about choosing plays that are suitable has to be who chooses. If 2 or 3 deaf people choose a play they think is suitable, others may disagree. I really like to see everything accessible. It's very dangerous to choose. For example, in the arts, whether it's a painting, sculpture, or a play, or even music, who can really choose? It's very difficult.
Stuart?
I've noticed that deaf theatre has a low profile in terms of publicity at the moment.
We're here discussing interpreting when what concerns me is what is suitable for the deaf people themselves. Money seems to be being concentrated on the interpreting side, but what about deaf culture and language? Where is it? And where is the deaf theatre? Now, the Arts Council of Great Britain say that theatre must be accessible to all disabled people. Well, that's fine, but there's no money being given for a theatre of the deaf. Everything seems to be very much geared to mainstreaming, education as well as theatre. Do we want this? There must be a balance. Deaf theatre and other types of theatre for deaf people who want to see other performances.
One London producer asked me about interpreting a play which was a fast comedy. Now, I'd seen it in America and they used 2 interpreters, and I felt it needed that because it was such a fast comedy. Well, we rang round and asked Peter Jones as well, but we found a lot of interpreters don't like working in pairs, only by themselves. Can I ask Peter Jones why this is? Well, I work by myself for quite a few reasons. Firstly, if you work with another interpreter, it means preparation and lots of practice with the other interpreter. That's lots of rehearsals and it takes more time. That's part of it. The second thing is, when I'm interpreting, my concentration is devoted entirely to the play, the stage, and the actor's dialogue. That takes all my concentration. Now, if I'm working with another interpreter, we will have planned which parts we are taking and taking turns. So when it comes to the performance, I would have to concentrate on more than one thing. I would feel unsure and concentration split between the play and the other interpreter. But that's only me. Other interpreters may like to work in pairs. I've no criticism of that. Personally, it's more difficult and prefer to work alone so I can concentrate on the play.
Yes, I agree with Peter Llewellyn-Jones and understand why some interpreters don't like working together. I realise now that it can be difficult. Sometimes some plays have an extremely large cast. How can one interpreter interpret for all of the characters? They simply can't. I feel that if it's a large production, there should be 1, 2 interpreters. I can't imagine any more than 2 interpreters. Yes, 2. 3 or 4 interpreters? No, I just couldn't imagine. I think 2 could work if they lived near each other. Obviously, Peter living in one part of the country and another person in London, trying to get together for rehearsals wouldn't work. It needs to be 2 people living in the same area, then it could be successful. Okay, Peter, you're a theatre interpreter. Can you suggest how others may improve their skills?
Well, we need training, really. Many interpreters may be interested in theatre, but how to train? That's the difficulty. 2 years ago, there was a short course. 3 days, I think, in London. Last year, the Oxford Stage Company set up 3 days again. And the same this year, which will be the 3rd. But there's still very little training available.
Right through this discussion, we've been talking about interpreters. But is there any training for deaf people on how to use interpreters? Because there are lots of complaints that they miss the actual play by having to shift their gaze from the performance to the interpreter. There really needs to be awareness training for the deaf audience to realise that this is mainstream theatre and that you need to train your eyes. Most deaf people think it's easy, but it's actually hard work and quite stressful. I'd like to see awareness workshops. Are Spit planning to do this?
No, it should be run by deaf people themselves, not interpreters. It's a strange situation with sign theatre. You can provide an interpreter who can carry on without any deaf audience. What about priorities like hospitals or courts? I'm wary of those interpreters that only focus on theatre, and there is a danger. A feeling of stardom develops and the interpreter laps up the adulation and the applause and aims only for fame. We need to stop that. After all, they're only there for access, just the same as in hospital. Their priorities should be equal to all things, theatres, hospitals and courts. I've met interpreters that say, I'm getting this money, and there doesn't even need to be deaf people there. We need to look at that situation.
I'd like to respond to Jean because it's important and it also links up with John. There are definitely interpreters who are very money-orientated and like the thought of fame that standing on a stage can give them. But where's the skill? I know some interpreters stand on the stage and the audience is so hooked into them that they miss the performance itself. There needs to be this ability to look at both, to look at the whole thing. Interpreters definitely need training, but as Peter Jones mentioned, we've only had 3 three-day training courses over the past 3 years. That's all. There's just no funding.
I've noticed that some of the best theatre interpreters, like Peter Jones and Wendy Ebsworth, are those that have some inner performance quality. This is important to be an interpreter for the theatre. Some interpreters don't have this inside them, so have nothing to give. It seems to me that deaf people react to the performance quality that the interpreter has inside, as well as the signing.
I agree with Terry Ruane, because hearing actors train and rehearse for, say, 4 weeks, dress rehearsals, etc., then along comes the interpreter. Their ability to convey feelings is very important.
I'd like to ask Peter Jones how many interpreters he feels can really interpret theatre. Difficult to say how many. I know of maybe 5 or 6 interpreters now who have the experience and are improving. That's what I hear anyway, that they are good interpreters. I can't judge myself. We need deaf people. Well, all of us, to judge whether they are good or bad. Also, we must remember that different interpreters have different styles. I'm not saying my way is best, each have their own way of doing it. We need to look at the styles, and at the moment there are so few. When we have more, then we can compare which is best for which play and so on. But at the moment it's still too early for that.
It's really important, as through my work I get a lot of requests for theatre interpreters throughout the UK, and I need to know who is suitable. I can't be expected to have all the interpreters, so I need a list to tell me who is good and acceptable to use. It's going to be really important for SPIT to produce that list. There are also too many so-called cowboy interpreters who, without even a stage 1, are interpreting. The situation really needs to be cleared up, and I'm delighted that SPIT are going to take this on board.
SPIT was established because there was much argument and anger about the standard and quality of theatre interpreters. I got together with the theatres and drew a code of good practice to put forward. Also to use only registered interpreters. It's not national yet, we'll see how it goes, then advise and set the standard nationwide. It's very hit and miss. They need to come for this professional advice and hopefully it will get passed on. At the moment, however, we've got no power to stop poor quality interpreting. We need to give them the awareness so it becomes their responsibility. I feel there should be a deaf consumer panel who are independent of SPIT, who can advise SPIT, but I don't feel that this should be done by SPIT themselves. Maybe they can plan this for the future.
Well, is it worthwhile or not, it's up to you to decide. Hopefully, we've just given you something to think about. Today, John Wilson has been a guest on our programme, but next week he'll be here with me to present the Sign On at Leisure programme. Bye-bye. Thank you.